In South Carolina, a house fire seemed, at first glance, to be just another tragic accident. But things took a sharp turn when investigators uncovered a second body. That discovery linked the incident to something much darker, a possible murder-for-hire plot. As the pieces came together, suspicion turned toward a group of powerful businessmen known for getting their way, no matter the cost. Law enforcement agents had to tread carefully, tapping into their underground connections to confront a web of ruthless conspirators. Contract killings are anything but simple. Solving one means not just catching the trigger man, but uncovering who ordered the hit in the first place. In this case, what looked like an accidental death in South Carolina quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. I'm Jim Carlst, the former head of the FBI's New York office. In this case, our agents exposed betrayal, deception, and high-stakes financial manipulation. They also learned a hard truth. Family loyalty can sometimes be more suffocating than supportive. The setting was Florence County, a quiet region in the heart of South Carolina. It's a place where farmlands meet wetlands, and where working-class families live side by side with the wealthy. Most of the residents in the small town of Atlanta enjoyed a peaceful country life. The nearest city, Florence, was about 40 kilometers away. But in the late 1980s, that peaceful life was shattered by a danger that no one saw coming. On the morning of June 10, 1987, Atlanta's volunteer fire department raced out to a blaze on a farm just outside town. When they arrived, the house was completely engulfed in flames. It belonged to William Graham, a respected and well-off tobacco farmer in the area. Firefighters did their best to contain the inferno, knowing the elderly man lived alone and might still be inside. Central Command, this is Unit 11C, we're close to having it under control, came the radio call. After battling the fire for 90 minutes, the crew finally managed to put out. Then investigators began combing through the charred remains. In what used to be the bedroom, they found the body of William Graham, lying in the remnants of his bed. Once the remains were recovered, fire investigators turned their attention to finding out how the blaze had started. "I think I found the origin," one said, pointing to clear burn marks. Burn patterns indicated that the fire had started in the bedroom, specifically near several electrical outlets. Investigators didn't find any evidence of accelerants, no suspicious chemicals in the furniture, floors, or walls. Their working theory was that a faulty electrical socket caused the blaze. "See this pattern? It started right here," one of the experts pointed out. At the time, it looked like nothing more than a tragic accident. An autopsy was conducted, and the findings pointed to massive burns and smoke inhalation. The pathologist chose not to perform x-rays and ultimately ruled the cause of death as carbon monoxide poisoning. From a legal and medical standpoint, the case seemed closed. However, not everyone in town was convinced. Rumors began circulating around Atlanta that William Graham hadn't just died in a fire. He had been murdered. These whispers caught the attention of District Attorney Dudley Salaby, who had read about the case in the local newspapers. Although there were no solid clues pointing to foul play, Salaby's gut told him something wasn't right. Detectives from the local sheriff's department decided to follow up. They spoke with Graham's neighbors and friends, trying to verify the rumors. Several people mentioned that Graham had been worried in the weeks leading up to his death. He had told a few close friends that someone might be plotting to kill him, but the police still couldn't find any physical evidence to support a homicide investigation. "We had a great evening together just the night before," one friend insisted. Everything seemed perfectly fine. After going over every detail and finding no reason to dig deeper, the authorities officially closed the case. Then, 7 months later, everything changed. In January 1988, a hunter in nearby Clarendon County stumbled upon a strange mound of dirt while walking across a field. Curious, he approached and discovered a horrifying sight: partially buried human remains. He called the police immediately. Officers quickly realized that the body had been buried in a shallow grave, barely 25 centimeters below the surface. Wild animals had likely disturbed the site, exposing the corpse. "Wait right here. I'll be back in a minute," said one officer to the shaken hunter. There were no immediate clues about who the person was or how they had died. But after comparing dental records, investigators identified the victim as Danel Rades, who had been reported missing about a month earlier. What was truly shocking, though, was the brutality of the murder. 1 bullet to the back, 2 to the face, and 5 more behind the left ear. This was no random act. It was a calculated execution. And for a quiet rural community like this one, it was deeply unsettling. At first, authorities saw no connection between this murder and the earlier fire that killed William Graham. But the sheriff's office knew the gravity of the situation and decided to call in reinforcements. The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, stepped in to assist. Lieutenant Gary Martin, based at SLED headquarters in Columbia, was no stranger to difficult investigations. "You always have to expect the unexpected," he explained. "Things aren't always what they seem, especially in cases with strange circumstances like this one." Agents from SLED teamed up with detectives from the local sheriff's department and began tracing Danel Rades' final known movements. They quickly learned that he was a regular in the local bar scene and often seen in the company of a man named Charles McCay. Word on the street painted Rades and McCay as career criminals, men who would do just about anything for money. The rumor was that they carried out illegal jobs for wealthy businessmen in the region. The team's goal now shifted. They needed to identify who had hired them, if anyone. Plenty of people in Atlanta reported seeing McCay and Rades together just before Rades disappeared. Some even recall McCay drunkenly bragging about killing him, but without hard proof, the investigation stalled. Still, detectives knew they had to get to McCay. Around that same time, someone filed an unrelated police report against Charles McCay, accusing him of breaking and entering along with assault. The timing was a lucky break. Deputies arrested him and took him into custody. "You're under arrest. Turn around and put your hands up," the officer ordered as they detained McCay. Back at SLED headquarters, McCay was interviewed. When agents brought up the murder of Rades, he hesitated, but eventually he began to talk. McCay admitted to the killing, but claimed it wasn't just his decision. He said he had help and motives far more complex than revenge. He confessed that after Rades' death, 2 of his family members had helped him cover up the crime. One of them had even driven the getaway car, not knowing the full extent of what had happened. "I didn't want them to go down for something they didn't do," McCay explained. "They were just trying to protect me." In exchange for not pressing charges against his relatives, McCay offered to tell the agents everything. He claimed that Rades had been talking too much, specifically about the death of William Graham. That triggered alarm bells for investigators. The Graham case had been ruled an accident, but now it was back under scrutiny. According to McCay, someone had hired him to kill Graham and then burn down his house to make it look like an electrical fire. He detailed how he broke into Graham's home late at night on June 9th, 1987. McCay said Graham was asleep in bed when he crept into the room and shot him in the head with a small caliber pistol. After the killing, McCay stole Graham's handgun and staged the fire by stuffing newspapers under bed and setting them ablaze. To make the scene appear less suspicious, he left the lights on so the fire wouldn't be noticeable from afar right away. Later, he sold both the murder weapon and the stolen gun to a friend. When asked who had ordered the hit, McCay was hesitant at first, but eventually he gave up 2 names, Bill Prince and Larry Marshall. Both men were not only business associates of Graham, but also wealthy and well-connected figures in the community. McCay explained that Bill Prince and Larry Marshall had hired him through an intermediary. They told him the job needed to look like an accident, preferably a fire, and offered him $20,000 to carry it out. They said make it look clean. "Make it look like a tragic accident," McCay recalled. Agents knew the names well. Prince and Marshall were prominent millionaires in the area, and both had deep business ties to William Graham. But McCay's testimony alone wasn't enough to charge them. They needed solid, physical evidence to back up his claims. There were also fears that the 2 businessmen could pressure McCay into recanting his statement. And that's exactly what happened. 10 months after Graham's death, on April 18, 1988, investigators exhumed his body, hoping to find evidence that had been missed during the initial autopsy. During the second examination, this time with more advanced techniques, X-rays revealed 2.32 caliber bullets still lodged in Graham's skull, along with a small entry wound behind his left ear. These findings clearly contradicted the original assumption of an accidental death. Agents quickly recovered the pistol that McCay had sold, and ballistic tests showed striking similarities between markings in the gun barrel and the bullets taken from Graham's remains. It strongly suggested that the murder weapon had, in fact, been used to kill Graham. With that, the case against McCay was growing stronger. But proving the involvement of Prince and Marshall still required more than just McCay's statement and the weapon. Investigators needed to tie them to the motive. Digging deeper, they uncovered that both men had previously been in a legal dispute with Graham and had lost $400,000 in the process. Even more telling, just 2 weeks before his death, Graham had filed yet another lawsuit against them. On top of that, they had taken out life insurance policies worth $500,000 each, naming one another as beneficiaries. Prince, in particular, stood to gain $500,000 from Graham's death. District Attorney Salabai and the SLED team began to see the full picture. Not only had Prince contacted the insurance company shortly after Graham died, but he had also asked about the quickest way to collect a payout, even offering to visit the office in person to pick up the check. There was more. Prince had also volunteered to arrange Graham's funeral, but he added one peculiar condition. He wanted Graham's body to be cremated. It now appeared to be a calculated move. Cremation would have destroyed any ballistic evidence that could prove Graham was murdered. That request, however, had come too late. Thanks to the exhumation and ballistics testing, the truth had come to light. The agents were finally able to begin building a stronger case against Prince and Marshall. Still, prosecutors hesitated. Without more direct evidence or a reliable witness to testify against them, it would be hard to make the charges stick. And just as feared, McCay eventually withdrew his confession and refused to cooperate any further. The investigation hit a standstill until a new lead emerged from a completely unexpected place, a cemetery. In December 1988, while investigators were still trying to salvage the Stahl case, an attorney contacted SLED with a surprising offer. He represented a man named Fred Andrews, also known by his nickname Peaches. Andrews had valuable information about the murder of William Graham, but he was afraid for his life and insisted on entering witness protection before talking. The next day, in a quiet parking lot, Andrews met with SLED agents James Gamble and Gary Martin. He admitted to being involved in illegal bookmaking and gambling operations, which had put him in close contact with Bill Prince and Larry Marshall. According to Andrews, the two businessmen had approached him months before Graham's death, asking if he could either carry out a hit himself or find someone who would, because Andrews had deep connections in the criminal world. Thanks to his work running underground gambling operations and frequent trips to Las Vegas, they figured he'd know someone who could get the job done. "They offered me $20,000 to do it," Andrews said, "but then they went with another guy, Charles McCay." Andrews had remained silent, but once McCay was arrested and started talking, Prince and Marshall began threatening Andrews to keep quiet. Their message was chilling. "Talk and you'll die." District Attorney Salabai believed Andrews could be the breakthrough they needed. He agreed to help protect him and work with federal agents to secretly record conversations that might implicate the businessmen. It didn't take long. Soon after, Bill Prince called Andrews directly. "You know who I am, don't you?" Prince said over the phone, "I think you've been talking." The conversation turned ominous. Prince warned that discussing Graham's case with authorities could be deadly. He implied that cooperating with law enforcement would have dire consequences, not just for Andrews, but possibly for others involved. "I think you know what could happen," he said. "People could get hurt." The phone call was recorded and became a key piece of evidence. Now agents had more than just McCay's withdrawn testimony. They had Andrews' statement, the ballistic proof, and now recorded threats from one of the alleged masterminds. It was time to act. Prosecutors obtained arrest warrants for both Bill Prince and Larry Marshall, charging them with conspiracy, murder for hire, and aiding in Graham's killing. On April 11, 1989, federal agents arrested Prince in a dramatic takedown near a lawyer's office. Shortly after, Marshall was apprehended while trying to leave town. Their trial began on May 6, 1991, in Florence County. The star witness? Fred Peaches Andrews. Under oath, He testified about Prince and Marshall's proposal to kill Graham and the threats they made afterward to keep him silent. His account, combined with the forensic evidence and recorded threats, created a compelling narrative for the jury. On May 14, 1991, the verdict was handed down. Prince and Marshall were found guilty of conspiracy, incitement to murder, and aiding in the crime. However, the jury acquitted McCay of murder and arson, convicting him only of burglary and conspiracy. This unusual outcome created legal challenges. Defense attorneys argued that if McCay, the person who physically committed the murder, was found not guilty of the killing, then their client shouldn't be held responsible either. Surprisingly, the judge agreed and overturned the verdict against Prince and Marshall, releasing them on $100,000 bail each. The state prosecutors were stunned but not defeated. They appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court, determined to reinstate the convictions and bring justice. The legal battle dragged on for more than 2 years, but in December 1993, the South Carolina Supreme Court finally issued its decision. The justices ruled that there wasn't enough evidence to prove Larry Marshall had personally intended for William Graham to be murdered, and as a result, they granted him a new trial. Prosecutors chose not to retry the case. But Bill Prince? That was a different story. The court found that there was overwhelming evidence Prince had actively sought out a hitman and arranged for Graham's death. The fact that Prince didn't pull the trigger didn't matter. He had orchestrated the crime. His conviction for conspiracy, solicitation, and aiding in the murder was upheld. Prince's bail was revoked in August 1994. But when authorities arrived at his home to take him into custody, he had already vanished. His wife claimed she hadn't seen him for days. He was officially on the run. Within days, police discovered Prince's abandoned car near the woods by Lake Marion, just shy of the Georgia border. With Interstates 95 and 26 nearby, he could have escaped in virtually any direction. Authorities feared he had already left the state, and the FBI took over the case. Special Agent Joe Jangener began digging into Prince's contacts. He discovered that Bill had a brother, Don Prince, who lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. Don, a successful insurance agent, had handled some of Bill's business affairs in the past. Investigators suspected he might be helping Bill hide. Instead of directly confronting Don, agents quietly recruited neighbors in his community to serve as informants. These residents were told to contact the FBI if they saw anything suspicious. It paid off. Within days, one of the neighbors spotted Bill Prince outside Don's house. By the time agents arrived, he had disappeared again. Wilmington's complex network of channels and marinas made it easy for someone with resources to vanish by boat. Worse, the FBI discovered Don wasn't just hiding his brother. He was actively working to undermine the case. He had contacted multiple witnesses who had testified against Bill, trying to convince him to change their stories. One of his associates even approached Fred Andrews and pressured him to recant. "I'm not signing anything for you," Andrews replied firmly. Despite the pressure, Andrews refused to budge. But Don managed to persuade about 20 other witnesses to backtrack on their earlier statements. Fred Andrews remained the last stronghold of truth, and that made him a target. In December 1994, someone shot at Andrews outside his home. Though he survived, the message was clear. The situation was escalating quickly, and the FBI knew they had to act before anyone else got hurt. They found a key informant close to Prince's inner circle. The man was terrified of being seen with law enforcement, so agents gave him a secure way to pass messages anonymously. In August 1995, he reached out with a pager number tied to a motel in Knoxville, Tennessee. FBI agents rushed to the scene and staked out the location. Hours later, they spotted a man matching Prince's description, disguised, tanned, wearing a straw hat, and dressed like a local. They approached cautiously. "FBI, don't move." Prince initially denied who he was, but after a few questions, he gave up. A year after fleeing justice, Bill Prince was back in custody, but his story didn't end there. Even behind bars, Prince continued to plot. He confided in a fellow inmate, unaware that the man was a federal informant. Prince wanted to eliminate 5 people: Fred Andrews, Larry Marshall, the lead FBI agent who arrested him, an elderly man from whom he stood to gain insurance money, and even his own son, whom he suspected had helped the authorities during his arrest. He offered $5,000 per hit and asked his brother Don to handle the payments. Once again, the FBI set up a sting. They provided the informant with a fake assassin and staged the murder of Fred Andrews, complete with a Photoshop crime scene. Prince believed it, at least at first, and began discussing payments and plans for the next target. But he had doubts. "I don't recognize him," Prince said, squinting at the photo. "The beard looks off." To reinforce the ruse, agents fed a local reporter's story. The article mentioned Andrews had vanished and that his well-known car had been found in police custody. It didn't take long for Don Prince to read the story and tell his brother. It's done. Now, convinced a hit had happened, Prince agreed to pay the fake assassin. Don arranged to meet the killer, who was actually an undercover agent, at a rest stop to hand off the money. When Don arrived and asked for directions to Turbeville, the code phrase was in place. The moment he turned his back, agents swarmed in and arrested him. "What can I say?" Don muttered. "You do what you got to do for family." With both brothers finally in custody, the law had its final word. Bill Prince, already serving life, was sentenced to an additional 22 years for conspiracy to commit murder while in prison. Don Prince received 17 and a half years for his role in the plot. Thanks to careful coordination, undercover work, and a lot of patience, the investigators stopped one of the most cold-blooded conspiracies the region had ever seen, and possibly saved multiple lives in the process.